it wasn't depression, it was unprocessed grief, it was unprocessed emotional pain. And when I started to allow that with help, to allow that grief to surface safely and be released through my body, not just talkie, I started to get better. And that's when I was like, maybe I'm not alone here. Maybe I'm not the only one that has been diagnosed with depression who actually has unprocessed pain. You know, I went into therapy, I took medication at the beginning. I started to do body-based working through the body in terms of grieving and releasing emotions. And that kind of whole process, I got signed off work, and it was really like, I've got to do, you know, I've got 2 kids. I need to save my life. No one's going to do it for me. I need to save my own life. But also the warrior woman had to bow down in humility and actually ask for help, which was very difficult. And being able to say, I can't do this alone, please help me. Yeah. Really big deal for somebody that has been a warrior.
Hello, I'm the self-development coach, Johnny Lawrence, and welcome to another episode of Life Talk, the self-development podcast. Today, I'm very excited. I have a wonderful lady to speak to today, and I can't wait to share her wisdom with you. Smile. You look very serious.
I'm just gripped. I'm listening.
Sorry, no, for those that can't see, she looked very serious there. I was just like, okay. Today, I'm here with the wonderful Donna Lancaster. I'm sure many of the listeners have spoken about you many times on other podcast episodes, so I'm sure that many people are excited to listen to you today. For those that don't know, Donna was the co-founder and facilitator of the Bridge Retreat, which was an immersive 6-day residential program that allows for exceptionally effective healing and inspiring experiences. There was a stunning documentary called Loved that I encourage absolutely anybody who's interested in Donna's work or sort of curious as to what it's about to have a good watch of, because it was absolutely incredible. Yeah, I loved it, but we'll get into that in a second. Let me do this introduction. It follows 12 people through an experience over 6 days, and I'll definitely put the link in the show notes so people can see it. Can I do that? I didn't ask that before.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the more people that see it, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Donna's also got a book called The Bridge that will be published by Penguin Life in spring 2022. And she is the creator of a program called Deepening into Life. And this is a 6-month online members only program supporting people to develop or strengthen their spiritual foundations for their life. Hello, Donna. How are you?
Hello.
I'm never good at reading off paper, you know. Was it obvious?
I was so gripped. No, hello. It's really nice to be here. And like I said, I'm really honoured that you invited me. So thank you.
No, I'm just really happy that you said yes. And I know I'm even more honoured because you're taking a bit of a social media break at the moment. And yeah, I feel very special. So
good. I'm glad.
I think it's important to say that the exceptional work that you did with the Bridge Retreat, unfortunately, the Bridge Retreat is no longer operating, is it? So yeah, I just thought that was important to say in case anyone got excited and wanted to go ahead but obviously they can still work with you through your Deepening into Life program. Is that right?
Yeah, and we do other workshops as well, and we will be doing other workshops. But yeah, the Bridge, like many small businesses in the pandemic, it suffered greatly, and we tried to take it online. But when you're doing healing work and the sort of work that we do, which involves things like safe touch, it was difficult to make that crossover. So we decided, at this point, we needed to close our doors and work with people in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, as I said in the introduction, that documentary Loved is a very beautiful film, a stunning film that shows the work that you did there. It really did touch me. I know we've just spoken a little bit before we've pressed record, but it was just so fantastic. And I don't have the words. I rarely don't have the words, but but I don't have the words. I mean, what was that experience like? I bet that was an incredible experience.
It really was. It was just very special that you know, the director Jake Knowles, who asked us, and he asked us if he could do it like a fly on the wall, literally a fly on the wall documentary where they don't interfere and minimal edits, etc. and just filming us doing our work with people and a lot of traumatized people and very distressed people. So yeah, it was a magical week. It was I think it was the hottest week of the year as well. So it was like, the temperature was high in every sense, but it was like that group of people, the courage, you know, as we briefly just spoke about, just like I said to you, John, it was like physically taking out their broken hearts and showing the world and saying, here's my shattered heart, you know, please don't step on it. Beautiful. And incredibly, as you know, because you've watched the film, such a journey that they go on around healing their pasts and really coming to a place where we symbolically get them to cross a bridge over into the next phase of their lives, hopefully less encumbered by the pain of their past.
Yeah, and I believe it's a film for everybody. As somebody that has gone through some significant trauma as a child, and it's impacted me through my whole life, and it's only really, say, the last 5 to 10 years that I've really gone into it. I've had the courage to sort of look into it and talk about it and go back to those moments and feelings that I now realize the significance of it. I used to do the thing that I'm sure you've seen 100 times. I always used to make light of it, make joke of it in some ways, and only to realize that was my way of coping. So as somebody that had been through that sort of trauma and has had to forge my way through life, watching that movie was very, very special for me. But I also believe that anybody that's, you know, you'll be very hard pressed to find anybody in this world that doesn't know somebody that's going through some level of trauma and whatever that might be. So I think it's another good film for understanding people that are going through high levels of trauma, because that doesn't always present in the way that people think it does it? You know, sometimes it can come across like, you know, frankly, you're acting like an arsehole, but actually it's that pain, isn't it? It's that pain that drives them sort of protection mechanisms in some ways.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think it's a film for everybody, and I encourage anyone to watch it. And like I said awkwardly in the introduction, I'll put it into the show notes so that everyone can get to it nice and easily. But for those that aren't yet familiar with you, tell people about your remarkable journey towards becoming the person that you are today.
How long you got? I mean, I think, you know, when I was thinking about this, you know, and you know, I often get asked that, and I think, you know, there's facts about my life, like many people. I had, you know, I grew up in a really challenging home environment. My dad was a violent man. He was an alcoholic, and my mum was you know, she was addicted to him and his drama. So there was a lot of chaos and lack of safety in my childhood, and coupled with that, you know, I'm half a mixed race. I'm half Black African and half white British, and so there was, where I lived, I experienced a lot of racism. So it was like there was no safety at school, there's no safety at home, and so my childhood was a place of lack of safety, really. And really, I always say, Johnny, that my own journey towards this, to being in the work that I'm doing and have been doing for over 30 years, has been pain and suffering have been my greatest teachers, you know, and my father as part of that, you know, and it's taken me years of work to get to that place where I can say that he has been one of my most significant spiritual teachers, actually. But I had to do a lot of work on that.
I bet. Yeah. It always strikes me every time I hear you speak. I resonate with you so strongly. I have a similar background to that, as well as the mixed race thing. And, you know, I often tell a story to people. I've said it on videos before about getting spat on in the queue and in the post office by people who didn't understand mixed race relationships, and they can't believe it. You know, they can't believe it. And I'm like, well, that's what it was in the 80s, you know, that's what it was. And you know, people would do that and it wouldn't be the outrage. You can't even imagine that happening now. Someone would say something or get it on video and it'd be on social media or something like that. But back then it just happened all the time. It's those little micro experiences that just built up your perception of reality growing up, you know.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, my mum, regularly would get spat at in the street, you know, with her two, well, she had 3 children, but the 2 of us were obviously brown, and then my sister was like a lighter shade, so she looked white, which was always interesting for her when she brought friends home, you know, from school that were making racist remarks, and then she'd say, yeah, come back to my house.
Awkward.
But, yeah, exactly, awkward. But yeah, it's really, it takes a lot of unpacking that stuff and the pain around all of those different layers of rejection, because we all need to belong. You know, we are relational as human beings, we're relational, we belong in community. And when you have those kind of microaggressions, those kind of rejections in different communities, be that school or family or your, you know, your social community, it takes a big, you know, it takes a big toll. Yeah. And if you don't do your work, you're just like the walking wounded, and that can then leaks out of you. And that's the thing. There's always a quote that I use, which I love. You know, I love a quote, and it is that if you do not transform your pain, you will always transmit it.
Oh, and
Richard Rohr wrote that, and I think it's so true. Is that pain, unprocessed pain, leaks out of us all the time, in illness, in sickness, in our bodies, in our, you know, road rage or trolley rage. You know, people are just in pain, and they don't know, because we're not taught generally how to process pain healthily, emotional pain. And so it's just coming out of them towards their loved ones, the stranger in the street. And you know, that's what my work's about. It's helping people to process their emotional pain so that they can come back to the truth of who they are.
Wow. How did you move from that early beginnings of, you know, all of the trauma that you must have seen and experienced, and sort of your perception of the world being sort of trained from the very beginning? I really love that sort of analogy you use as your father as a trainer. It's one that, again, I resonate with strongly. So how did your path sort of lead you towards helping people?
Yeah, I mean, slowly. The mistake I made, one of many mistakes I made, was that I tried too early to go into the helping profession. So as in my early 20s, I started working at volunteering at a children's home where I lived, and I was, you know, I just found it was like the Pied Piper, kind of all these young people started to gravitate towards me, and it was like because they could feel that resonance of pain, and that I'd been through some stuff, you know. And I remember sitting and, you know, stroking. In those days you could touch young people in you know, safely stroke their hair, and then all these young people, like big buffly burly boys, would come and say, can you stroke my hair? And they were just craving this touch. Really sad, actually. We were allowed as workers to safely touch them then in those days. And I just remember sitting there with all these young people going, my turn, you know, and thinking, maybe I've got something to offer here, you know, maybe I can use what I've been through and actually, you know, offer something in the world. But the mistake that I made, Johnny, was that I didn't do my own work first or as part of that process. So I was always looking at these young people, and then I trained to be a child protection social worker. Don't have to be Freud to figure that one out. Trying to save little versions of myself. But what it did is, it was like I was looking through what I call my wound lenses at these children and their stories and their situations, which would always distort my vision. And it meant that I was always making actually wonky, for want of a better word, wonky decisions, and that they weren't clean. I wasn't seeing through clear, healed lenses, and you know, that wasn't healthy. And I got into, you know, I worked in child protection and as a social worker, and it was really took its toll on me, because all my trauma came to the surface, and it was all necessary and perfect, but it was also incredibly painful. But that's kind of what started me off in those early days, was that first children's home kind of, maybe I have something to offer. And it was this desire to love, I always say, to love people into their own healing. And just that stroking their hair, these children felt loved in that moment. And I just wanted to love people in the way that I hadn't been loved.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And it's another sort of sign there that how different things are now. Like, you can't do that now, can you? And it's such a shame, because with all the good intentions that most people have, it sounds to me like a very necessary part of the job. I mean, I got a feeling when you said that because I thought, well, yeah, that would have been lovely, you know. Really would have been. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's why, as you know, Johnny, in the film of the Bridge Retreat, the documentary called Loved, is we use safe, loving touch as a healing, as a medicine. You know, we literally touch people, we hold them in front of other people with their, you know, there's a particular ritual that we call the love ritual, where we literally take them in our arms and we do a visualization to ask them to imagine a time when they were a young child and they needed their mother or their father to come and hold them safely, and they didn't come, or for whatever reason it wasn't safe, and then we come and we step in that experience and we lovingly hold these people. And of course we have to get their permission and everything before that's all dealt with. They know that that's going to happen. Many people who came on the bridge said that was the moment for them, that they really were able to heal their broken heart.
Yeah, strangely enough for me, that watching the film, that was a moment for me too, because I don't know whether it's normal or not, but one of the things that I've often struggled with is interaction in that way, like being touched, you know, hugging, you know. Ironically, I married into a family of huggers, and it was like, oh man. So now I've got a lot more used to it, but it's something that I struggle with, and I realize it's because I you know, maybe it's just, it doesn't feel right. It's not something I'm familiar with, isn't it? And one of the things I often think about is how you can become comfortable with something that's familiar, even if it's not good for you, you know. Even if it's not good for you, you just because you know what it is, you know, that makes it comfortable, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, that was my experience in terms of violent relationships. You know, it was like I unconsciously sought out men that would be violent towards me because it's what I knew. It was familiar, and that word familiar comes from family, you know. And it was like I was like a magnet, you know. I could go to a party and there'd be a guy and it was like vroom, and he would have the same with me, and it was like, you know, there it was, and it would always erupt into some kind of violent relationship. And that was so familiar to me, and it was my comfort zone. And if anyone's never lived through violent childhood experiences, you might not understand it, but those people like yourself, and we get it, you know, that you go towards what is familiar because it reminds you, for better or worse, of your family, and it feels a connection, even a dysfunctional one.
Yeah, I always sort of hesitate to say the word comfort, but that's what it is for me anyway. From my perspective, it was always that, recognize this, must be home. You know, that sort of feeling, isn't it?
Yeah.
So your work obviously progressed to where you are now. So what was the sort of progression for that? How did you move through from working with the young kids there all the way to what you're doing today? And that's quite a broad question. But...
Do you know how old I am? I've been around. But yes, so basically I was a child protection social worker, and then I hadn't done my work, and the universe was so generous, like it is, and it brought me literally to my knees, and I had a breakdown because I had to split up a family of children, and I had to put them into foster care because of their parents' violent relationship, and they couldn't stay in the same homes. So not only overnight they lost both their mum and dad and then each other, and it just broke me. It really broke me, Johnny. And so I had a breakdown, which was one of the hardest challenges, answering your next question, one of the hardest challenges of my life was my breakdown. And it was also the best thing that ever happened to me. It absolutely changed my life in every sense, because it made me stop. I mean, there was a time when I was like, I couldn't leave the house. I was really, really unwell. And it made me finally face my past and begin the healing journey.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, and then that once I started the healing journey, as these things, as you know, I will say that the wounds are a portal. Our wounds, emotional wounds, are a portal. They're an opening for transformation. And if you dare to crawl through, not go under or over or around and pretend it's not there, but crawl through, do your work, and you come out the other side, and it's like Narnia. It's like, and all these opportunities start coming towards you, and all these different people come into your life. And so I then start, you know, I did I trained to be a facilitator of something called the Hoffman process, which is another residential program working with childhood wounding. And then I became their head of teaching for 9 years. And then I was also trained in imago relationship therapy and started working with couples. And, you know, I just built from there really. And I was facilitating all these groups in prisons and women's refuges, and I was busy.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
Yeah, you know, but it's 30 years of work and also working on myself, and that breakdown was the breakthrough that I needed.
I mean, that self-development journey there, that you know, when I went through my own, I remember it being like a stairway. And every time you get over the next step, there's a different view, and you've got a whole bunch of new questions that you didn't even know you knew about before, you know. And it's just that layering of understanding and learning all at the same time. And you can exist in a way to help others whilst you're helping yourself at the same time. And I think that they definitely have to come together. You certainly need to be in a well place yourself. Let's say that. But I mean, what a journey. You did that very well, actually, considering how much you had to cover. I'm very impressed by that.
Loads.
Well done. So yeah, as you say, that the next question I was going to ask is like, what was one of the hardest and challenging sort of things that you had to go through? I mean, if we could, you know, first of all, thank you for sharing that, because when you said it, you know, I felt that must have been extremely difficult. How did you get through that?
Thank you. I mean, I've just remembered, my fingers crossed. I remembered what I was going to say. Should I tell you that?
Go for it.
Before it goes. Oh, is it gone? This happens all the time. I start bumbling and then I'm like, oh, it's gone. I've remembered. Quick. So it was to say that this pain that we're talking about, that so many people don't know what to do with, and that your listeners will have their own version of that. Might not be as extreme as your story or my story, but they will have their own version of unprocessed emotional pain. But I always say to people when I work with them, like on the bridge, I would say, there is nothing you will go through in these 6 days that is more painful than living half a life.
Absolutely.
There's nothing that will be more painful, because everyone is so scared of facing their past pain. It's like, will I die from it? Will I start crying and never stop? Will my rage take me over? What will happen to me? You know, and it's like what will happen to you if you're held safely in good hands. What will happen to you is you will heal. You will move through that portal, and it will not be worse. It's actually, of course, it involves facing pain, but it's no more painful than living half a life. It really isn't.
What a wonderful statement. Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of a conversation I often have with a friend of mine called Patrick, and we talk about the question we were both asked at one point: have you had enough pain yet? Because if you haven't, then you're gonna find it hard to choose that over what's going on, you know. And I know that it took a couple of goes for me, yeah, you know, and same for him. But yeah, it's such a great statement, that, and I'm glad you remembered it.
Yeah.
Now I've got to remember the question.
Yeah.
That's horrible when that happens.
Welcome to my world.
So I think the question I asked was, how did you get through that extremely challenging situation that you found yourself in, with having to break up that family? How did you get through that? Well,
I mean, in terms of the breakdown, you mean?
Yeah.
So I with help, with a lot of help. So it finally made me you know, go to the doctors. I got put on antidepressants. I mean, this is the funny thing, is I was working with so many depressed people, but I'm sure you recognize this. I'm a warrior woman. I have I had a warrior woman defense around me because I wouldn't have survived my childhood without it. So I'm used to fighting. I fight, you know, if something needs you to kind of achieve something, I would push myself. You know, I'd never go the easy way. It's not the warrior woman way, you know. Basically the breakdown meant that I couldn't, I literally, all those, it was like laying down my arms. I couldn't do that anymore, and I was so exhausted. So then I went to the doctors and I got put on, like I said, and antidepressants, and that enabled me just to get, because I was at one point I was quite suicidal, so it enabled me to just get my head above the parapet, to actually say, okay, what do I need to do? I knew medication wasn't the answer for me. And I knew, you know, that I knew that I wasn't depressed. That was the thing. I worked with so many people who were depressed, and then when the doctor said, "I think you're depressed," I was like, "This doesn't feel right." But obviously the medication worked. But actually, what I came to see, and that's what led me down to the path of, you know, the work that I've been doing on the bridge, is that it wasn't depression. It was unprocessed grief. It was unprocessed emotional pain. And when I started to allow that with help, to allow that grief to surface safely and be released through my body, not just talkie, I started to get better. And that's when I was like, maybe I'm not alone here. Maybe I'm not the only one that has been diagnosed with depression who actually has unprocessed pain. Yeah. And I'm not the only one.
No.
So that's what really, all the kind of, you know, I went into therapy, I took medication at the beginning, I started to do body-based working through the body in terms of grieving and releasing emotions. And that kind of whole process, I got signed off work, and it was really like, I've got to do, you know, I've got 2 kids. I need to save my life. No one's going to do it for me. I need to save my own life. But also the warrior woman had to bow down in humility and actually ask for help, which was very difficult. And I'm sure you resonate, Johnny, like actually being able to say, I can't do this alone. Please help me. Really big deal for somebody that has been a warrior.
You go through life as a kid, you know, and you have to sort of, you don't get to be a kid, do you? That bit gets passed over, you know. All of a sudden you're having to look after your brothers and sisters, or you're having to look after your own mother or whatever, and you're seeing violent scenes all the time, and whether it's right or wrong, you're becoming numb to it, you know. And when them things go away and you become a bit older, I found that I was always stuffing my feelings to the bottom of the pile so I could make room for other people and their needs, because that's what I always had to do. I had no time to cry or be sad. I had to make sure that my brother was okay, or my sister was okay, or my mum was okay. And I think it's part of being a warrior, frankly, to be able to say, okay, I know when to say I'm done, or not, I'm broken, because I don't favor that saying, but that I've had enough. The word you used that really resonated the most there was exhausted, because it has an exhaustion to it that is like no one can, you just can't describe it.
It's yeah, unless you've lived it, you can't really know it. You might cognitively, but not know it. And it is exhausting being a warrior. And it is, when you, as you know, when you dare to lay down your arms, when you dare to start to pull off this, you know, like this big metal plates of armor, underneath that is this vulnerable, wounded, crushed individual, and terrified, you know, and so to take that armor off is such a massive deal. And it's like facing death, because without it as a child, you may well have not survived. Certainly in my case. So for me to take that armor off, it's like the universe had to break me. I had to get to the point where I could not even get out of bed, that I was too exhausted to even lean down and pick up the armor and plonk it on, you know. It was like, it ain't happening, Donna. And that's where the humility piece comes in, Johnny, isn't it? Because then you know, I always say I was nose down in the dirt of humility street, and it took the universe to break my warrior defense for my broken heart to begin to heal. And it brings such humility with it. It's a beautiful and painful and exquisite gift.
Oh, brilliant words. I mean, the question that springs to mind there is, what am I without my armor? You know, what am I without my armor? There's whole parts of myself that I've never been allowed, or never allowed myself to experience, to understand. And that, for me, that was the source of my addiction. You know, once I started picking up alcohol, because it you know, I was finding it progressively harder to hide that trauma, or to force that trauma down. And I was, turns out this red wine does the trick too. I'll just use that for a bit.
All the therapy I need.
Yeah. So yeah, and I did that for a long time, but then I started realizing that that's all I was doing, you know, and you know, there are little signs and little cracks appear in your life, don't they? And you're like, oh, I think I've plugged that up. Oh, I've got no fingers left. What do I do now? And that's where you find yourself in humility street, as you say. A brilliant way of describing it, in fact. It leads me on to another question. Actually, there was a statement made in the documentary Loved, and I want to talk a bit about the inner child healing that you spoke about in the documentary, and specifically the statement, resentment is the stuck anger of when we weren't allowed to express ourselves. That one was like, I paused it. I was like, let me think about that statement.
Yeah.
It was a gold moment for me. It was very, very powerful. Can you sort of explain what was meant by that statement?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's such a big subject, isn't it? But essentially, you know, as children, we are, even if you have really great parents, you are dependent upon them, and sometimes you as children don't get your needs fully met. Even if they were great, they might have been busy working, or you know, just paying the bills, but you at times you didn't feel that you were seen or heard or understood, and that creates wounds in children, you know. And I think what we do, because we rely on our parents for our very survival, or our families for our very survival, is that we swallow so much of our truth. We learn very quickly to adapt ourselves. We learn to be what they need us to be, like you, the caretaker, looking after everyone else. Be a good boy, Johnny, and don't say much, you know, keep your feelings to yourself, thank you very much. And so we learn to adapt to our environment to survive. And then what that does is all that swallowed emotion, all that swallowed pain, it involves, absolutely, because grief includes anger. You cannot go through what you went through, what I went through, without there being an element of rage. It's just, you might not know it, you might not recognize it, but as a child, to be rejected by your very family for whatever reasons, it fills you with not just despair, but at a point, there'll be points where you were just like, this is so unfair, and that all gets stuffed down. And then it turns, as anger does, is if it's left, it festers. And that's why depression has been described, I'm sure you've heard, as anger turned inwards. It's like all that unprocessed anger goes in, and then we go into collapse, you know, and things like resentment, bitterness, frustration, they're all flavors of anger. And anger is a necessary part of the grieving process.
Yeah. Wow. Really beautifully explained. Flavors of anger. Like that a lot. Wow, I've never heard that said before. You're like a Yoda.
I don't know about that.
No, it's that, yeah, you know, resentment is stuck anger of when we weren't allowed to express ourselves, and Absolutely. You just, yeah, it was just a wonderful part of the documentary, and it really got me. It's funny, it's one of the, it's interesting, it's a part you could almost miss, because it's mixed in with so much other powerful stuff that's going on at the time. But when I heard the statement, I was like, oh, you know, and that was a great explanation. So thank you for that. But there was another part as well. I also loved the sort of concept of loss of identity, because that's something I experienced for a long time. You know, I used to take my cues from external sources. So say celebrity culture, or even just people I'd look up to. We grew up around some areas where there were one or two gangs, and those sort of people, they look for people like me, you know, that easily molded, easily led. And I had a loss of identity, and you mentioned something called the 5 A's. And I think I got it because I was trying to read your board behind you in the movie, but I couldn't quite read. But I think it was positive attention, affection, acceptance, appreciation, and allowance. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you talk more about that? Because you mentioned something about them, if they're missing, that it can cause that identity problem.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is the work, just to be clear, this is the work of the psychotherapist and author David Richo.
Right.
David Richo came up with these, what he calls the 5 A's of need, and you've just described them: attention, affection, acceptance, allowance, and appreciation. And essentially it's about helping us understand the human condition, and it's also a sort of, I don't want to say simple, because that doesn't do David Rico's work, it just does his work a disservice, but it's like a accessible way to understand attachment theory. And essentially what he's saying is that all children, all of us, it's universal, we needed those 5 A's from our caregivers, our primary caregivers, usually our parents, and of course others, but our primary caregivers, we needed those 5 A's. And if you are lucky enough to have received a healthy flow of those 5 A's in your childhood as you grew up, you will become securely attached. You will become somebody that can have healthy, easy, sustainable relationships. Yeah, you have the usual wobbles, but you don't, have the kind of relationships that I had in my 20s and 30s, and so it creates a secure attachment. And the most and the important thing, a part of that, is a strong sense of who you are. And then for the likes of you and I and many other people, if you didn't get those 5 A's met fully, or you got them met from one parent and not the other, as an example, and they were, they went away or abandoned you or whatever through divorce or death, is you will feel a lack. And then what that does is that then creates an insecure or an ambivalent attachment model inside of you. And then what that creates is a lack of sense of self. This is when people start to struggle with worthiness, because if our parents don't love us and meet our needs in the way, those 5 A's, if they can't do that, we as children, because we are egocentric by definition, we think there's something wrong with us. It must be my fault. And so then what happens is your identity gets very fractured, and you don't really believe in yourself, and you don't feel that you belong, because you didn't belong where? In your family. You weren't welcome there. So then that just has that impact in all areas of your life, and it affects your sense of self completely.
Wow, I should have drunk more coffee before this one.
His work, I really encourage your listeners and you to check it out. David Richo, Richo, so it's Rich O, but it's pronounced Rico. And he's not that well known in the UK. He's American, but he's very well known in America. And his work has been fundamental in my own healing journey. And it's not for everybody, because it's very cognitive. It's quite dense. Some of his books, are quite dense, but really, when I read that 5 A's model, it landed. And then I approached David Richo, and I'd been to some of his workshops and stuff, and I said, can we use it? Can we get permission? And being who he is, and he's an amazing Buddhist, and he just said, I trust you, Donna, use it. Because I was like going to pay him or something for using his work, and he just said, I trust you, I know you'll do it justice, so go use it.
I mean, it landed with me, absolutely. I mean, and as you say, like, he makes it accessible, and not to diminish it in any way, it was almost obvious when you said it. It was like, of course, attention, affection, acceptance, appreciation, allowance. It's like, tell me it's just like, it's really obvious. It's like,
and it's the thing, isn't it? You think, why aren't we learning this stuff in school? Why don't we understand this much earlier? Why aren't people offering us this kind of information? Just the same about grief and unprocessed, the impact of unexpressed pain, emotional pain. Why don't we learn about, why aren't people teaching us how to feel and be with our feelings? And that's why so many people get into so many mental health issues. It's because they don't know what to do with their pain.
No, and I mean, if at risk of us both going off on a tangent here, I think just in that moment, I think about my experience with those 5 A's and what I may have lacked, and then I think about somebody now with access to social media and all of the sort of dangers that could bring. Because I mean, I was looking around at TV shows and trying to mimic things that I thought looked strong and tough and cool, or whatever I felt I needed at the time. And I was also looking for the same qualities out in the streets. Had I had social media, I don't know what would have happened. It could have been a very dangerous thing, and I imagine it is.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad. Just alone in this sort of self-sabotaging behaviors that I indulged in my, my teens and 20s, that there weren't mobile phones, that there were that there's no footage of me, crawling across a nightclub on my knees, from being so drunk, that there's no footage of these things. And these poor young people out there with all of the pressures on them from social media and all the ways that we know. And then also that somebody in those kind of necessary rites of passage, in a way, where you get too drunk as a kid and do X, Y, and Z, and you're just trying to find your way in the world, and somebody's filming it. It just brings a whole other layer to the challenges that young people face.
And then on top of that, you get all of the scrutinization of other people's comments, and stuff like that. I mean, that to me, we speak in a time where the whole thing happened around the football and then three lads, and it's just like, what's wrong with people? Like, I get it from an intellectual perspective, but from an emotional level, I don't understand that way of thinking. I'm just like, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to put that out there? I don't understand.
It's very, in some ways, it's very simple. Is that hurt people hurt people?
Oh yeah.
And if you have, don't even, we'll go off on a massive tangent about the patriarchy and the impact of patriarchy on men. Because patriarchy is costing men as much as women, because you're not allowed to feel anything unless it's anger. That's the only powerful emotion you're allowed to feel. And where's that going to leak out? In a football crowd. And and it's like, you're not allowed to be a stay-at-home dad. You're not allowed, there's all these things and judgments that society has about the man up and all that toxic masculinity. And you shove that down enough vulnerable, sensitive, emotional young boys' throats long enough, and you see what they chant in a football pitch.
That's one of the most articulate ways I've ever heard that expressed. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's funny you say that. I was sat in a restaurant the other day, and I heard a little boy crying, and I think it was a mum that said to the little boy, "Oh, stop crying like a girl," or something like that. "Don't cry like a girl. Come on, be a big boy," and all this. And I was just like, it's still happening now. Like, and it's woven into our society. We've all sort of, a lack of a better way, been trained to think this way, in a way.
Absolutely.
Comes from our parents who came from theirs, and all that sort of stuff. And it's woven into our societal beliefs as well, I suspect.
That's a whole other podcast right there.
Oh, I think it is. We should do a series. I'll just ask you loads of questions. I mean, a lot of what we just spoke about comes around to a bigger question, really, which is, you and I briefly discussed anger via the comment section. You wrote a post about road rage, and it really, I loved the words that you wrote. Do you have any wisdom that you could impart regarding issues surrounding anger? I know that's quite an open question, so if we're not anymore, I'll fill in the gaps if we need to.
I think that the thing about anger is it's one of the most misunderstood emotions in the human palette of emotions, because people associate anger with violence and destruction and abuse and sometimes death. That's not anger. That's violence and destruction and abuse, and aggression and all those other flavors. It's that they're not anger. They're actually anger that's festered long enough. So healthy expressions of our anger are so important. And anger, if it's channeled safely, it's very close. It's like the twin of passion. And so if you learn, like I used to be a very angry person, now I'm a very passionate person. And I've basically flipped it to make it work for me. And I now, and I think we need anger in our society. People wouldn't go marching in the streets against, COVID vaccine passports if they didn't feel some sense of righteous indignation, that sense of passion and sometimes anger and rage about what's happening in our world. So it can be, you know, I always say that anger is about fire, but the thing about fire is you have to treat it with respect, because it can either transform or it can burn and destroy. And this is the thing about the healthy expression of anger, is finding ways to safely channel it and also to release it. And people who have a history of abuse find that terrifying. That's why a lot of people have anxiety. And you may or may not know that one of the posts I did is that I said that sometimes anxiety is your anger looking for an exit. You know, and it's really, I think it's a really misunderstood, and it's part of the grieving process. You know, you need to feel anger, and it's not even necessarily at somebody, it's just a natural part of that. It wasn't okay what happened to me. You know, if you go back to childhood, it wasn't okay, and that generates that flame, and we need to let that flow through us. And that's where anger costs us so dearly in society, like going back to those poor young men being racially abused and all the other ways. You know, anger's the stuff of unprocessed anger is the stuff of wars.
And it gets so closely linked to hate, and again, that's where, you know, you hate someone because of the color of their skin. I mean, you say that statement, it just sounds ridiculous, because it is, but it's not that's not what's going on, is what you're, you know, is what it sounds like you're saying. And it's, you know, sorry, you know,
it's displaced anger. It's just looking for somewhere else for your own, because, you know, anger is also not a primary emotion. So underneath that, before that, if you like, is the sadness, the hurt, the sense of injustice. And so you know, you have to do not transform your pain, you will transmit it. You know, you have to disperse it somewhere. So I'll displace it over there on who? Those people that don't look like me, or I can make up stories, and then that's generational, as we know, and it gets passed down and down through the generations, so that you have a mother saying to a little boy, don't cry like a girl. You know, heaven help us.
I mean, again, you know, hate, fear, all them words come in. And I mean, I was always very scared of my rage. I never realized it, but I was always scared of it, because what was my example of rage? The example I'd seen was excessive violence from a large man to a small boy, or whatever, or my mum. So for me, it never felt safe to go near rage, you know. And it wasn't until I encountered professional wrestling, and I was able to have an outlet. And my coach once said to me, if you're going to come here, you have to wrestle. You can't do that, because that's not good. I'm like, okay, right. Understood. And I looked up to him a lot, and he was one of my first healthy-ish, right? I mean, it's hard pressed to find extremely, like, healthy doesn't have to look like Disney characters, right?
No.
Because he had a lot of flaws, bless him, but he was good to me. I know that, you know, I know that for sure.
He was the mentor you needed at that point in your life, it sounds like.
He very much was. And he, you know, somebody that believed in me when, you know, I was 9.5 stone. I was very undernourished as a kid, due to not having a lot of money. Our family didn't have a lot of money. And, you know, when you get into your teens and you're undernourished, you tell your mates you want to be a professional wrestler. Laughter consumes the room. And I understand that. But when you go to a guy who is a professional wrestler, he's like, yeah, sure, I'll train you. No problem. Nice. That means a lot. It means a lot. Because I thought I was going to get laughed at like that, you know. But yeah, anyway.
Nice stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, often anger is often a part of the grieving process. And I know that a lot of your work surrounds the grieving process and grief. What perspective or guidance could you offer to someone who may be experiencing grief at this time?
Yeah, I mean, grief again is misunderstood, because people often associate grief with just bereavement, the death of someone, whereas grief is about the death of something or someone. So that something can be aspects of yourself. You've lost aspects of yourself, like your innocence, your childhood, your joy, your rage, you know, whatever it might be. But so I think the important thing with grief is understanding that grief is a natural emotional reaction to any kind of loss. So not just the death of somebody, like I said, like things like your loss of aspects of yourself. And in order to heal, we need to grieve. We need to feel those feelings. And very simply, if somebody's looking to work with their own grief, and they haven't got the money to access, you know, therapy or go on a retreat or whatever, is the real pivotal points that I would like to offer people, is that you need to find someone that you trust enough to share your story, so that you can sit opposite somebody and they won't try and fix you or say, oh yeah, me too, that they will listen to you, they will see you, and they will validate your experience without intervention. They will just hold space for you, basically. And so you need to find that person. You know, it might be a therapist if you've got the money, or a coach, but it could also be your best friend. It could also be, you know, somebody in your community that you feel that you can trust. So you tell your story as much as you know of it, and you say, this is what happened to me. That's so important. And then we need to feel the feelings related to the story, related to what happened to us, the anger, the sadness, the fear of what happened to us. And the best way I know to do that is through moving the body. And you can do it through dance, you can do it through, you know, like boxing, you know, kickboxing, or bats and pillows or whatever, but you need to support yourself to find a way to access and release the sadness, the anger, the fear, and that absolutely has to involve the body. A few tears sitting in a chair is not going to do it. You need to involve the body. For me, dance is, you know, I always say, because anger is, if you're not angry about what's happening in the world, then there's something missing here, you know, and that's where apathy and depression sets in, because we're not kind of getting fired up by what's happening in the world. Whereas if you I release anger every day, you know, and like you, I go to the gym regularly, and I have, I don't know if you know what a sled is, with weights on.
Yeah,
you have, like,
unfortunately.
of course you do, yeah. And I have the, you know, the kind of jacket thing, and I pull it. And I just say because I just say to, I know everybody at the gym, and I just say, like, I'm gonna just release some anger today, and I'm not angry at anything, I'm just angry at what's happening in the world, and I just roar, you know, and they all laugh at me, and the music's loud, and they're like, oh, Donna's off, and I just get it out, and I come out, and I'm like, oh, I'm so joyful because I've released that anger. So coming back to your question, it's around physical and emotional release, having our story validated, and then, you know, once we do that, and it's a slow process, we then have to start to learn to self-soothe and take care of ourselves, make better choices, and that becomes easier once you've released some of this pain.
I have never thought of the sled as an analogy for anger, but what an amazing, like the fact that it's trying to pull you back as well, which is just brilliant.
And then the warrior comes up, and I'm like,
genius. It's absolutely genius. It really is. I mean, there was a part in the documentary that you made where people were just them primal screams, and I was just like, oh, that just looks so therapeutic. In a way, just that, getting that, because I mean, where is it really safe? If I walked out there and screamed like that, there'd be police cars in 10 minutes.
Yes,
you know, so it's just that feeling of being able to just get all of that out for as long as you need to, or physically get it out there, you know, till you've got no energy left. I mean, it's a really, really interesting way to deal with it. I've never thought of the physicality of it, of grief.
Oh, it's so essential, because where does it live? Blocked emotion lives in the body, you know, and so we need the body to release it. And that's why, you know, like things like dance, if you know, I've got some great anger music, and I just put it on, and then I'll just like dancing like a mad woman, you know. And then what normally happens is I get really furious, I start thinking about, you know, Boris Johnson or whatever, and I'm like, oh, you know, and then
hope you never see him.
And then I make the sound, and then what often follows when I lie down and then have some more meditative music is I start sobbing, because that's also underneath that rage is the sadness about what's happening in our world, as an example, or what happened to you personally. But for me, it's more about what's going on, and then I sob. And that's what I say, that's why I'm so joyful, because I daily release anger. And I cry most days, you know, and it makes me joyful.
No, it's beautiful. It really is. That is one of the best sort of explanations for self-soothing I've ever heard, actually. Like, that's what you need to do to be able to move forward. And I've said that a lot with people before, is that there are daily practices that I have to do that might not don't make sense to anybody else, but if I don't do them, I know they have an impact on my day. If I, you know,
Absolutely.
But going back to the grief thing, I mean, it's only to add perspective from my own personal experience with grief not being for people but for being for things, was when I was ready to give up alcohol. And I was speaking to someone who was helping me through it, and I said to them, it was just coming up to Christmas, and I said, oh, I'll do it in the new year. And they said, there'll always be a Christmas, there'll always be a birthday, there'll always be this. And I was like, oh, it's gonna make me do it this weekend. So I said, okay, we'll do it this weekend. And I had some drinks on the Friday, and I had some drinks on the Saturday, and I knew that that was the last night. And I went and I got my last drink, and I knew as I was holding it in my hand that it was my last drink, and I cried, and I thought, what in the heck is going on? And when I mentioned this to him, he said, sounds a bit, because I was trying to articulate and I couldn't find a word, and then he looked at me and he said, sounds like grieving. And it just went bang, that's the word, that's the one I was looking for, grieving, you know. And that was a very powerful teaching moment for me. It wasn't very nice, but
beautiful, Jenny. And it's one of the examples actually that we used to give on the bridge, because it's like, if that drink has been there for you for most of your life, it's like the best friend you ever had. It takes away your pain. It's always within reach, you know. It's there, it's a best friend. And so you're literally saying goodbye because it's a best friend that turns on you and beats you up and leaves you all battered and like, you know, destructive and feeling crap. And so you still have to go through a grieving process of saying goodbye, whether it's a cigarette, whether it's a drink, whatever. It's like, I'm saying goodbye to something that has always been there for me in a way that maybe people weren't, and that involves grief. Beautiful.
Yeah, no, it does involve grief, and you know, it was something that had to happen. But I mean, alcohol came into my life when I left my family home at 16, 17 years old, and I ironically experienced loneliness for the first time because I wasn't in the family home anymore. And that's when alcohol became a companion, you know. So it'd been, like you say, it'd been there for a very long time. So that was how I learned that grief wasn't about people, it's about things. But I'd never had it articulated like that. How important do you believe it is to sort of establish and protect your personal boundaries?
That's another podcast. I mean, it's essential. I mean, boundaries, again, if you grew up in an environment where there were, you know, very loose boundaries or no boundaries, or, you know, like in my family environment, the boundaries were there, but they were invisible until you crossed them. So it was very confusing. So it's like, oh, I don't know that it's there because it's like an invisible tripwire, and then I go over it and then I'm punished for it, and then the next day it's also moved. So it's very confusing. And some other people have really what are more barriers than boundaries. So it's more really rigid, controlling kind of parenting, when everything is, and there's no negotiation. It's just, you do as I tell you to do, you know. You might even have one parent that does one and one parent that does another, but your families, your parents, they model to you and set the template for you around boundaries. And also the worthiness piece is, if we don't have any worth because we didn't get the 5 A's, is we don't think we're worthy of what is bound, you know. It's like we just deserve what we get, you know. And so boundaries is an essential, learning boundaries is an essential part of the healing process, because it links to identity. Because as you start to understand and explore, like when I work with people around boundaries, the first thing is, what matters to you? So does it matter to you, if you can't even think for yourself, does it matter to you about respect, for example? And someone say, yeah, I think people should be respected. They might not apply that to themselves. So then respect is the first baseline for you. How would you honor a boundary around respect for yourself? What does that look like? How would it feel? You know, it's so important that you explore values, and then you say, how am I going to uphold those values with boundaries? It's essential. And then you start to, the more you honor your own boundaries, once you've established your values, the more you start to really believe that you're somebody worthwhile. That's where the worthiness piece starts to come in, because you basically are in alignment with your own values towards yourself.
That's really, really well put. Yeah, because I'm a strong believer in values and beliefs, and just checking in with them regularly to make sure that, you know, when you because just think about it, like when I was 16, 17, even 20, I didn't have any kids. My values were very different. I could do whatever I liked, and there were pretty much zero consequences. But when you have children, that changes, and it's important to sort of go, well, that I might just cross that one out. And but what will it be now? You know, what will that value be now? You know, I know certainly for respect was something I had to learn the hard way. So I like that explanation. Thank you for that. Changing lanes. Last question. Do you agree that society is slowly moving towards a powerful feeling of dehumanization? If you do agree, what do you think the impact this will have on people? Because I mean, I use examples like automated checkouts. So now we've got contactless and we don't have to see anybody in the checkout, you know, and before people were on their phones whilst they were, you know, things were being checked out and people having those feelings of not feeling human. So now we don't even have that. We have automated checkouts, don't even need people. Self-driving vehicles apparently coming in. So we don't need cabbies anymore who love it. They love a good chat, don't they? Putting the world to rights. So we don't even get the driving experience that we enjoy. Sometimes I go for a drive if I'm feeling a bit mixed up in the head, and just lack of contact due to sort of online services, you know, sort of Amazon. You know, a good example is, and I'm sure you did it as well, Blockbusters. If you want to watch a movie, you had the excitement of jumping in the car, going to Blockbusters, hoping that the movie you wanted was there, being excited that it was, and that there was only one copy and you got it. And then, yeah, you know, you might have waited 3 weeks for it to come out, or you might have to make friends with the person who works there, hold the copy for me, sort of thing. But there was all this interaction, all this experience that goes into it. Reading the back of the copy, renting out the same movie twice because it's been months since you've seen it or something. And then you get the popcorn and it would all be exciting. You go home, it's a whole experience. That experience is now mimicked by Netflix. You know, there's a dehumanization going on that's deeper than that. You know, corporations valuing sort of money over people, you know, as a way of moving forward. I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'm just aware what the time is.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I just mean for you in terms of the length of your podcast, and that's a massive question. But I think, yeah, it's to try and be succinct. I think it is a really worrying phase of life that we're in at the moment, and this push towards, as you say, the kind of the disconnection actually, and the kind of individualistic approach to life. So really trying to almost sabotage our desire for community and connection and relational, you know, blockbuster type interactions, and I think it's especially dangerous for young people. But I also believe, because I am in my heart an optimist, and I believe in underneath everything, I believe that there is this kind of universal love that supports us all. It just gets blocked in some forms, but and I think there are also many movements and communities of people that are just not willing to buy what's being sold, or to go down that route, that are, you know, the festival goers and the people that are really sort of coming together in nature and in groups and in different ways of finding community, you know. And that's one of the things I think is so important for young people, is they need to find their community, find their tribe. And it might not be, sadly, their family, but you need to go towards what lights you up and find other like-hearted souls, as I call them, and really connect with them. And so I think, yes, it's a worry what's being kind of shoved down our throats, but I'm you know, I'm a great believer in the human spirit, and people are starting to wake up more and more. And you know, when with my, as you know, I run an online, it has to be online, community at the moment, which is called Deepening into Life. And when I put that out there with minimal advertising, nearly 100 people signed up for it immediately, because there's a yearning for a deepening into life. There's a yearning for connection that's beyond the talking about the weather, that is about coming back and connecting really, you know, heart to heart with other like-hearted souls. So I really have hope, but just want to say one thing, John, is I really believe young people in particular need eldership. They need, if they have got parents that haven't done their work, their inner work on healing themselves, they're just going to pass down generation and generation of dysfunction. And that's where people like you and me and many others can become elders and mentors in communities of young people, to actually help guide them and be a parental figure, like you with the wrestling guy, to basically informally guide people, because otherwise they're going to really lose their way. And I think that's why suicide rates are so high, is because young people look at the future and think, sod that. And they don't realize that because they're only shown the shallows, that they need somebody to teach them how to breathe underwater. They need somebody to teach them how to learn to swim and dive down. And when you dive down, there's pearls. But they need those guides. And that's where, part of my work going forward is I want to really invest in eldership training, that people become wise elders in their community.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, I didn't know I was worth it. I didn't know what I was capable of. I didn't know what I thought my life that I lead, my wonderful life, was by accident. Of course it wasn't. And it's about being able to spare some people some of them really obvious mistakes that are really easy to make, that are devastating to your life, that can really cause that really big, oh, why did I do that? And then you spend your whole life living that moment over and over again until you process it, So I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, the dehumanization, I regretted putting that question in when I tried to say dehumanization. I was like, man, but the dehumanization of society, or the attempts at it alone, we've had a test run. It's not for me. It's not for a lot of people. The lockdowns, that showed us what it would look like. Imagine that forever. No thanks. Yeah. I think you're right. There's a lot of people going, sod that, Yeah. So great answer to a very difficult question. Thank you so much today for everything that you've brought to the table. It's just been amazing. You say a length of the podcast, I don't want it to end, frankly. So, but I mean, just one bit of parting wisdom. Have you got anything that you think would help people move forward their self-development just before you go?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, find your tribe. So find your community is so important. Find, seek out mentors, dare to ask somebody, a trusted elder in your community or something, dare to just say, can you help me? Can you guide me? I think I would also say, people, step away from the screens. It's obvious, but do, pick up a book, read about, psychology, read about the human condition, listen to podcasts, really learn about, it's like I always use the example of becoming a parent. People, when they get a dog, a puppy, they go on training, generally, to how to raise a puppy. But they don't do that generally with parenting. And it's the same with, they don't. It's just, they're like, oh, I'll just fumble along. And it's like, if you didn't have a great childhood, you might want to learn how to become a parent, because just saying I'll do it the opposite of my parents is not a good starting point. And I think it's the same with the self-development journey. It's like, really learn, absorb information, step away from attention deficit of just 2 minutes on a screen and then you're bored, or 20 seconds or whatever it is, because again, we are being, the internet alone is proven to be shrinking our brains. We're becoming stupid, basically, because we're not using and activating parts of our brain. So I think it's these things they're really important for your development, to learn, to grow. That's what you're meant to do. And also, I would say as well, start your work early. There's so many distractions, there's so many sparkly things that that will kind of go, oh, over here, and oh, look at that drink, and oh, look at that phone, and look at those shoes. And I understand that, because I was distracted by all of them too. But my wisdom would be, don't wait until you are completely devastated by life and you've hurt perhaps yourself and a lot of people in the car crash that was your life. Maybe start to learn to drive before you get behind the car, which is yourself, your life.
Oh, that's beautiful. Really, really beautiful, and great advice, which I encourage anyone to take up, especially, well, but to be honest, it brings us nicely into you telling people what's next and where they can find you.
Yeah, so where they can find me is usually I'm on a break from social media for a while, but I'm usually quite present on my Instagram account. I like writing, and I write quite a lot of posts and stuff to offer what I've learned along the way. So that's Instagram, it's Donna Lancs, so it's Donna Donna, and then Lancs Lancs, so it's at Donna Lancs. They can find out about the spiritual community of Deepening into Life, which is via the website deepeningintolife.com. And we also do other workshops, like we're doing a mother wound workshop in September, and we're sold out at the minute, but there's a waiting list. So there's, the best way to keep up to date is either Instagram, or if you want to hear about my work and also get some really interesting articles, if I say so myself, on the newsletter that I send out. So you can sign up for the newsletter once a month. It comes out, and it's deepeningintolife.com. And also I've got the book coming out, as you said, which is based on the work of the bridge. So even though the bridge is not happening in practice, the bridge book is offering those. It's basically a self-help, self-personal development process. It takes you through the journey of learning how to process your own grief, and it gives you resources each step of the way, and really leads you on a path to the deeper dimensions of life. Once you, as I always say, you need to heal your individual ones in service to the collective ones, so that we can ultimately love and serve in the world. And that's what that book's really about.
Oh, I can't wait for that. It's going to be amazing. How are you doing with that? Or can't you say?
How am I doing with it?
Yeah.
Oh, it's finished.
It's finished. It's finished. Sorry.
It's finished. It's just delayed because of COVID. So
I see. Right. Okay.
Publishing dates has gone back and back because of.
Understood.
I'm already on book number 2. Mm-hmm.
Oh, check you out. Where'd you find the time?
It's an introvert's dream to write books, Johnny, because you don't see anyone.
it's something that I would love to do at some point, but I've got a few other things to do first. So, but been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Thanks, Johnny.
Take care.